Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Laser Sports Academy podcast. You're here with Bootza and Nicola Breton, Mr. Nickel, the 2013 Zeltac champion with the Canberra Dragons and a site operator now at Zone 3 Canberra. How are you, my friend? Welcome along.
I'm good. It's been busy. It's the end of the year. But yeah, it's a quiet night tonight, except for this. So yeah, looking forward to it. We've been trying to get this on the books now for a while, haven't we?
We have been trying to get it on the books for a while, and in fact, this is the second attempt at it tonight because Bootza didn't hit the record button the first time round. So, yes, anyway, fortunately, we caught it pretty early, but that was very funny. If you're wondering why we had a big grin on our face when we first jumped on, that's why. But yes.
We'll muddle.
Yeah,
we'll muddle through this start thinking, oh, did we say we've said this already, haven't we?
Exactly. So, no, it's brilliant to have you on, mate. I've been we have been trying to tee this up for a while because, as a lot of people know, you've been in the game a long time, but you've taken a hiatus. And lucky for us, you've returned in the guise of a site operator at Zone 3 Canberra, which many people are super stoked about. Mate, why don't you tell us, there's a lot of new viewers, there's a lot of international viewers that might not know much about you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so I'm a weird person as far as Australia goes. I'm born and bred in Canberra, so I grew up here. And laser tag Zone 3 was kind of just this presence that always existed in Canberra as far as kids are concerned. It's very rare that you find someone who lived in Canberra through their teenage years, got to the end of high school and hasn't played laser tag. Which will give you an idea of just how sort of present the place is in Canberra. And so, like many kids, I think I played birthday parties there. I'm gonna preempt a question you're probably gonna ask here. Sorry, you often ask, what was your first experience with laser tag? And in the previous conversation, I had told you I don't remember, and it's true. I don't remember when my first game of laser tag was, because it must have been a birthday party. But I do distinctly remember being conned into coming to play laser tag at League, Monday Night League, and back then there was like no divisions, there was no junior league or anything like that. So a 14-year-old Nick stepped into a crowd of some of the old hands from laser tag, which are probably less PC than the people we have nowadays.
I didn't realise you were so young when you started in League.
Yeah, I was young. I was like, I was 14, maybe just before my 15th birthday. So I was in year 9, I think it was, which must have been 14, 15. But I remember that one really clear memory was coming into my 3rd week of League, like 3rd Monday, and I've walked in through the front door. It's a big, long building for anyone who's hasn't been there. You walked up to the counter, and Doc, who was obviously the site op before, has leant over the counter and gone, "Nick, Sally's going to offer you a job." And that's the first thing I heard that night. I was like, "Oh, what?"
Yes!
I hadn't actually looked for one. I hadn't asked for one. They reached out to me for that one. And so started my working career, I guess, to some degree, which started at Zone. Goes full circle. I had been a tennis coach beforehand, but working through Zone, I played competition, continued there. Continued playing once I finished school and went into university and things like that. I think my first nationals was 2008. Which was Willerton?
Willerton,
Perth.
yes.
Yeah, which was awesome. Obviously kept playing up through 2013, where it returned to Canberra, and obviously we won that one. And for a couple more years after that, and then I took, as you said, I took some time off. I kind of moved away. I still worked for Zone as a kind of a casual employee. I had a full-time job as well. I'd finished uni at that point. But continued to help out with the site. Doc and Sally had been like surrogate parents to me through my teenage years. So helping out the site was, it was for the love of the site. But then obviously, you get older, career sort of took me elsewhere. And I actually, I dropped off from about 2017, I think. Maybe a little bit before then even, actually. 2016.
You were at 2016, I'm pretty sure, because that was in Brisbane. And I remember you were there.
That was, I think that was the last one.
Yeah.
I was there, and that would have been, was it mid-year for that one?
That
I think.
would have been a Marchish one, yeah.
Marchish, yeah, that that's what it is probably. I remember playing that, and I think I stepped away after that, and I didn't come back. And
I did such a great job of running that tournament, mate, that I scared you away from laser tag.
clearly, it was a good tournament. I remember it. It was fun, but I just so I stepped away, career and everything, and I honestly never thought I'd be back. But I always kept in contact with a lot of the players here in Canberra and Doc and Sally as well. And then in 2019, 2020, sort of stars aligned. Obviously, Doc and Sally were sort of beginning the planning of their retirement. And it was floated because I'd always teased them. I'd always asked, "Hey, let me buy into the business," and they'd always said no. But it got floated seriously, and at the time, I actually said no. I had a career in front of me. It was going places at that point. And then it sort of dropped off. Obviously, our lovely world kind of started to fall apart around us.
I don't know what you're talking about. Can you expand on that?
No. And my career fell apart at the same time. Not badly. I was lucky enough. I had a full-time job through COVID, but it sort of stagnated. And then stars realigned themselves about a year later. And the opportunity came around again, and I said yes that time. I'm sure we can go into a bit more of how that came to be a little bit later. But and with that came my return to laser tag.
Yeah, that's...
Never planned it, but as a side op, and obviously then having to balance being a side op versus player a little bit more. 2021 didn't have the nationals, so my first year as an owner was just focused on the business, which is probably not a bad thing given the times at the time. And I kind of got sort of dragged into this year's nationals as kind of as a substitute. I was only there for half of nationals. I just couldn't get down for the whole 2 weeks. And now I find myself here, and I think the big thing was nationals. I am super glad I got there, because that's really what got the bug back again to the scene and everything. And we've got our challenges here in Canberra and things like that, and we'll go through that, I'm sure, or we'll talk about it in another conversation. But yeah, parallel to all this, I have a full-time job.
I hats off to you, mate. We've already had this conversation, but earlier tonight before we started recording, but how you manage a career and a venue as well at the same time is beyond me. For those of you who don't know out there, I'm a site operator, but I don't have a career that goes alongside it. So I fully recognise just what you got on your plate, mate. But just in terms of you coming back in, there's I guess a collection of us. There's us two as former players and now site operators. There's also Katie as well up the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah.
Benny Jansen, if you're he's not really much of a player anymore, but definitely was back in the day, and is still a site operator. So just that, I think it's, for me anyway, it's heartwarming because there's kind of for those of you who not aware, in our industry, there's kind of the big guys, the time zones and the kingpins, and then there's the independently owned venues like us, and we can, we can reflect a different model, so to speak, and a different set of values than some of those big players who have got investors and stuff to answer to and that kind of thing. They have different priorities. So, I love that there's small independent operators still in our industry flying the flag for laser tag. So, welcome back, mate. Yay. Woo.
It's been good, honestly, and nationals was like I copped a lot of calls when we first took over, especially from the older hands around the country that did know you knew who I was, but at nationals as well was very heartwarming. That I walked in and I remember thinking that, oh goodness, they're all young,
and I don't know anyone.
Am I old? And I don't know anybody. It took me like 5 minutes before I found someone or saw someone that I was like, oh, I know who that person is.
Did it feel like walking into a nightclub post 30, mate?
I don't think I've ever walked into a nightclub post 30.
That's what it's like.
Avoided that.
Everybody's really young around here.
But it was a little surreal walking back in, especially back into a site that I knew and I'd played at a couple of times. So it felt like it hadn't really changed that much. Which probably helped. But yeah, it has been really, really nice getting back in contact with all the old hands, and obviously making some new acquaintances and things like that. A lot of the SA people and things like that. So
yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was so good to connect with everybody. I I guess there's a couple of questions that I kind of want to twirl into one now.
yeah.
What was the key thing that got you over the line to get you back into the site, and what is your vision for the site? Because I'm kind of guess they're kind of two questions that are twined together, perhaps. And I'm happy for you to answer them both together or separately or however you want.
Oh well, we can answer. They do go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And the first one's going to sound fairly mercenary, honestly. What got me over the line to say yes the second time was two things. One, there was a logistical and a financial component to it. Funnily enough, because I had another partner. I've got a business partner. He's also an ex-staff member of Zone 3. He doesn't live in Canberra. So he knows the scene, he knows the business, though he didn't play competitively, not to the same extent by any stretch. And he was kind of looking, and we joined forces to make it work. And there was an element of investment in that. And my career at the time had kind of gone a little bit, where I was at least. So there was an element of ease of work day to day. Plus, this would be an opportunity to stretch, and I love the idea of building teams and businesses and things like that had already been on the table anyway. So it felt like a natural fit. The irony of this was that by the time the sale actually happened, some opportunities had happened in my day job, which took my career just like a roller coaster for the next 2 years, and it's just gone up and up and up, which is great, except for the fact I haven't spent as much time at Zone. Because I was super keen to spend more and more time there. And actually, the current job I'm in, I started the conversation with them was I want you guys to move me to 3 days a week eventually. And they were like, okay. It just hasn't happened because I want to build these business and things like that. I think two things that jump out immediately for taking over Zone was a genuine belief that I could retain at least that core ethos that Doc and Sally built. And because it's amazing, the idea that almost any teenager in Canberra will get to 18 and have played at this place. Yeah. It touches the lives of almost every child that grows up in Canberra. Yeah. And I think that's amazing. I also remember the scene that let me in. Sorry, go.
I was going to say not just Canberra as well. So Canberra gets busloads of kids from all over the country, and I have kids coming into at Sunshine Coast, particularly when I was working there, that have kids walking off the street. Oh yeah, went to Canberra and played down there, and we met a guy called Doc, and he mentioned your name and blah blah blah. So like it was like a lot of schools go down to Canberra for camps and things like that. So it's such a iconic venue in our country, I think, especially on the East Coast, particularly.
Yeah, it's fairly unique in that sense that it kind of it fits this really bizarre niche that it's a great blackmail tool because people come to Canberra because they come for the parliamentary components, the historic buildings, and that's all. To be blunt, it's all government subsidised to do that. But try and convince a bunch of 10-year-olds that Parliament House is cool is sometimes hard. But hey, behave at Parliament House because we're going to laser tag later tonight suddenly makes it a bit different. And I'm quite happy to continue reaping the benefits of that lovely government scheme. But it is very cool. Like, it's... A lot of people don't think of Canberra, especially when they're not born and bred in Canberra. They don't think about it as a city or as a place. It's kind of it's this sort of anomalous kind of. It's just where politicians live, right? But if you've been there and it's not just politicians' houses, it's where I got to play laser tag, or in some cases where I got to introduce to laser tag for the first time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Especially for country kids.
And Doc and Sally really facilitated that family feel so well. And it was the site was a real reflection of the fact that there was a family business and they worked in it themselves, and it was highly driven by schools and leagues and things like that. So it's so good to know that you've been able to come in and be the right fit to maintain that ethos. I think it's a really, valuable, nice thing that you guys are doing.
And I hope we're seen as that. I know there's going to be detractors to how we do things versus how Doc and Sally do things. That's inevitable. And the reality is the way we have to run the business is fundamentally different at the back end to how Doc and Sally ran it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But keeping that, again, that ethos, that kind of how it interacts with the public, making sure that we're continuing to support schools, both locally and nationally. We're trying to build more and more support for like local initiatives. We'll continue, supporting charities and things like that, which we still do, and always have done. So, yeah, there's going to be challenges. There always will be.
Yes. Well, mate, I think we could talk about that for hours by itself. We've already had a conversation that we're probably going to have to unpack this conversation over a series of interviews. But right now, I reckon we should get onto some laser sporting stuff because I wanted to ask you about, firstly, your site. Like, how is the Canberra scene going? And how involved in that scene are you? Are you still playing? Are you going to play at Hobart? Like, what's your involvement?
So, two parts to that question, I think. They kind of lean into each other. I do play, not quite as consistently, and that is a byproduct. The scene itself has shrunk a little bit. Like the scene, unfortunately, is quite small in Canberra at the moment. We could spend interviews unpacking the why of that, and it's probably. There's lots of reasons for it, not least of all the last couple of years has probably not helped either. But with such a small scene at the moment, we've got a couple of different things that we have to balance. We've got a few dedicated and like a handful of core older players that want to get to those nationals. We've got some younger players now that are coming through that also want to get there, but we don't have a lot of people to continue building that scene. Like we're kind of floating just below what I think is a catalyst point where it feeds itself.
Yeah. I always felt like 20 was the number where you want to get to, and then things start to feed on themselves. Yeah, and they start bringing friends, and it's fun enough that you're retaining players at a rate that you're getting more than losing players.
We're not quite, to be blunt, we're just not quite there. We are at times, like we'll get nights of 20, but it's not consistent. And I think so. There's a couple of different things. We need to build that scene to help build our ability to play at nationals. I'm a player, and I still will be. I don't think I'll ever necessarily go back and playing on an A team. I don't know. Maybe depends on how small the scene is in Canberra, I guess. But I'll probably be at Hobart. I can't imagine I won't come back to the Nationals, and I'll endeavour to get there for the whole 2 weeks moving forward.
Awesome. Well, I can fully attest as an operator as well that, especially during COVID and coming out of COVID, that the league, whilst it's a passion project, is the least financially viable product that you have on your list. Yeah. So when there's a lot of pressure on in all the other areas of the business, your priority can only go to one place. Because it's the survival of the business that's at stake. So to put lots of time into the league when you're coming out of something like COVID, we were in the same situation. We've had the drop off as well, and we're still recovering. And the diversion of attention, because you're putting all your energy into recovering the business well, because without the business we don't have any league at all. But by a little bit of that's what I try to do the same thing, retain enough attention that I can keep it at least moving forward at a reasonable rate, and then when the space becomes available to really put energy into it, you can essentially, and
without trying to make excuses for it. I mentioned that obviously. I bought this thinking I bought it at the time of purchasing Zone. I thought I was going to have more time than I did. And so that combined with it has also, I can clearly see that I haven't been able to put enough time into it. And hopefully that's moving forward. That's changing a little bit. I've got some very, very good staff members behind running the business. That gives that frees up my time to focus on it. So that's the hope, especially going into next year.
Yeah, and one of the things that we really want to focus on here on the Laser Sports Academy is creating tools that are available for operators. so that we can actually leverage what we have to do it in a much more efficient way, essentially. Using videos and photos and promotional materials, things like that, and videos that help players learn the basic skills that, you can have people working at your site who don't necessarily know that much about playing laser tag, who can just direct them in the right place to learn at least.
Yeah.
So anyway,
resources we never had when we started.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. We're all chipping away doing our thing. So no, it's just great to have you back in the circles, mate. And no doubt we'll have more conversations about how we can all improve our leagues and bounce out of this in the best way. So it's good that you're coming to. This is just a spontaneous question I just thought of. It's great that you're coming to Tassie, because I think Tassie will be the model for if Canberra can have a Nats. Because Tassie's also a small venue in a way, so there's questions about there's no problems with the arena, of course, but when the Nats was in Canberra in 2013, we only had 22 teams or something, or I can't remember the number.
It was a smaller one, yeah.
And if we were to have 37 teams in a small venue, there's a whole bunch more logistical challenges to do. But Canberra also, Tassie has the same challenge, so they've got the small foyer. They've got the arcade as well, but I think they're, if the guys with the brains can figure the scheduling out in a way where they can make it work with that many teams, then I think Tassie would be a great model. And do you have an interest in putting your hand back up for Canberra at some stage?
Yes. Without going into a huge amount of details, which I'm not sure if I can right now. There's a few things I suspect. I'd like to. We obviously know where the next two ones are. Obviously, we've got Tassie and we've got New Zealand after that, which would be interesting. It'll be interesting to see, given it's a site that doesn't exist yet. At least it's not built yet, I don't believe. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. I think
it's currently in progress, I think. So
yeah, I know the buildings, like, it's least I believe that happened actually during Nationals.
Definitely a leap of faith, but surely Cat can pull this one off. Go Cat!
I think it's going to be it's going to be a really interesting one for us at Canberra to watch. I won't go into a huge amount of details as to why, but that leap of faith with potentially building the site, pitching it while building the site. Something to consider. There are a couple other places around Australia that also probably want to put their hand up. So it's going to be an interesting one to see who, balancing us wanting to take it and yes, wanting to do it. Yes, wanting to get our scene a little bit bigger. The logistical components of, as you've just said, and also, who else is going to put up their hand? Is there a logical kind of extrapolation where maybe Canberra doesn't take it in 2025? Maybe we take it in 2026, for instance. It gives us a bit more runway. Again, a whole conversation could be had around how we rotate nationals around the country, and sites we'd love to see it go back to or go to for the first time, for instance. Well, especially with a bunch of new site ops.
I want to ask you that then. So this wasn't on the list of questions, but I'm going to add it on there. Do you have your views about state-based competitions and the changing in their level of importance going forward with what's happening at nationals, with limited amount of spots available for teams at nationals? What's your philosophy? Do you have a position on any of that stuff?
So I think in our pre-conversation we talked about moving the game forward, and I don't want to preempt a question that you're probably going to ask me in a moment or a little bit later down the track.
Go for it, mate.
I think state-based competitions is actually one of the main methods of moving laser tag as a sport forward. And a lot of people are going to sit there and go, well, that's the antithesis of, oh my goodness, it's clearly a little bit tired, of nationals. But I don't think it has to be. And I think if you balance the benefit of it, I think in the long run, it's the way it has to go. It also potentially naturally fits into a limiting of nationals teams, the idea of team caps and things like that. So there's a few different ways, but I think state-based competitions or area-based competitions, Canberra's tiny, right? I think inevitably if we do a state-based or an area-based competition, we'll inevitably end up sort of swallowing in parts of New South Wales and vice versa. So I think, I think they're fundamentally important. I don't think anyone's quite nailed how to do them. Obviously, the competitions in Queensland have been seemingly have been a roaring success, but this is kind of one of those things that, because I was out of the scene for a while, I've kind of missed how they've developed. I'm only seeing how they're I sit on the peripherals and watch them happen and go, oh, okay, that looks pretty cool.
Well, nothing happened for a long time. During COVID, nothing really happened except for the Rumble. Essentially, we were lucky.
Yeah.
We finished a week-long tournament and went outside after the trophy presentation, and cases started popping up on the news screen. So so many things had to go right for that tournament to get away. We were extremely lucky in that respect. So yeah, because of that reason, not a lot of stuff was organised. So we haven't been doing a lot actually the last few years, but I tend to agree with you. I really see a strong future for state-based comps because of the team cap situation. So not everybody can go to nationals. So whereabouts are you going to take, players that are coming through but can't quite make the nationals teams, for example, because you can only take so many players. And also there's a lot of people who, like myself, for example, finding getting 2 weeks off life and work is becoming increasingly difficult. So having a state-based comp that goes for a weekend or 3 or 4 days is perfect. I get to play, I get to compete, I get to go away and play with my friends, enjoy the game and the sport, but I can just take a small bite of time out of my calendar and not a big chunk.
And I think there's a natural progression here as well, that we've found it difficult to date to do this. With nationals falling where it does in August, Australia broadly, sorry, 2 parts to this. Australia broadly has all of its public holidays. It front loads its public holidays into the start of the year, right? Long weekends. I don't know about you guys, but long weekends for Canberra is also a really weird time because we actually have a lot of people leave Canberra, so our long weekends are actually our lower trade periods. A competition on a long weekend would be swell. But you can't do that necessarily at the moment because they use all the long weekends for pre-nats in the lead up to August.
Yes.
Shift nationals forwards to March, which I think is where it's going.
Yep.
I believe New Zealand, and please collectively everyone don't quote me on this. I believe New Zealand has committed to a May nationals.
It's certainly earlier. It's a transition point, so that they don't do it all at the big jump in 1 year, but maybe over 2 years.
Because one of the things I was doing when I was talking to people there was Canberra can't put on a nationals in August. There's no point for us. It would be a money pit for us. We need to put in an earlier in the year. It's also really cold in Canberra in the middle of winter. But yeah, you shift nationals forward. You suddenly now free up a whole bunch of long weekends post nationals where states can have competitions and not feel like they're stealing players from pre-nats or nationals themselves. And as you said, 2 weeks. I mean, again, this is another whole conversation in and of itself, is whether or not nationals needs to be shrunk down again a little bit or more formally split so people can choose one side or the other or both and feel like they can make that choice without, crippling teams and things like that. Because 2 weeks is huge. For a lot of people, that's their entire annual leave.
Yep. I think decisions for the Zeltac committee become a lot easier to do things like reduce teams and shorten the tournament when we do have the state-based comps kind of flowing. They go, okay, there's a product out there for these players. We can be a little bit more ruthless with cuts, perhaps. I think it may anyway make it easier for them to make those kinds of decisions. It's huge decisions to make. Like, basically saying there's every time they reduce the number of teams down, there's a whole bunch of teams that can't go anymore. And, the whole ethos of the Nationals has always been everybody gets to go and it's an all-inclusive event. So I can imagine how difficult it must be to make some of those decisions. So, but possibly, getting some of these state-based comps sort of working within a calendar that makes sense. And, I guess big controversial position I might have on things is I think we got one too many pre-nats. I think one of it, in order to fit in more state-based comps, I feel like we could probably do with one less. 3 pre-nats is great, but I think we could do with one less, which would allow time in the calendar for another state-based comp, because you need to make sure that they're spaced sufficiently apart that you know you're going to get an attendance to them.
Yeah, or there's enough of them, and this is I think I'm playing devil's advocate to your position there a little bit, but
Please.
does Zeltak, and I don't know, and this is again not been in the scene for quite some time, does Zeltak, or do we ever find the risk that Zeltak feels like state-based competitions start to cannibalize nationals? What happens when a state or a couple of states produces a competition that runs over the course of 4 or 5 days? It's far more accessible. The quality of the competition is the same. What happens when the competitions, or when a number of competitions get big enough and well enough run that they are considered from a competition level almost on par with nationals? I'm not suggesting that it's going to happen anytime soon, but that's the reality is how then does nationals continue to, like, how do those two fit together? Right. And I've got plans for Canberra, which I haven't been super vocal about yet, but the idea of state-based competitions, I think, is the way forward for this sport. And because of that, being a site-op, I get to, wield the site-op powers that I have. I can put competitions on. So watch this space. But yeah, so I don't claim to know how that's going to end.
I'm fully confident.
We'll
I'm very confident that they're all going to actually benefit each other. We're going to have, if we can get enough if we can work on our grassroots and our development of players at a local level well enough, and keep bringing new people into the game, there's certainly enough to, there's. I look at the Nationals it's like Test cricket. It's really long, and watching it for the whole entirety is probably not really realistic. It gets a bit boring after a while, but if you could watch finals, it's great. Watch the final day. No, it's not boring at all. It's exciting when you're playing and playing in it, but viewing it for that length of time might be a little bit of a different thing. And I feel like state-based comps can compress it all, have smaller number of teams, and feel a different. You don't need to have team restrictions, for example. So you could have players from different states playing together, form a super team, go for it. Like, we've got enough depth in Australia now where people can go and form their super teams. It's not going to destroy the competition. There's enough good players to go around in a 12 to 15 team comp, and you can also have younger players that might not have made a nationals team play as well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that you raised 2 points, but I think almost as important as state-based competitions. One, and I'm going to do this in reverse to what I actually you sort of mentioned them. One, younger players. We don't facilitate, and I don't know about other states, but I know there's the handicap systems and things like that. The rating system for players. I think traditionally we're pretty average at facilitating newer or lower level of play. So, imagine your good bodies of people would do a league, social netball level sort of style leagues. Not super competitive. You're there to have fun, but we just don't do it. I don't. And maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I've missed a scene somewhere in Australia that does it really, really well. But I do think we've traditionally struggled with kind of that proper delineation of levels. And I don't think there's an easy way forward with that, except for building more players and eventually being able to get there. But that's beside the point. But the other thing you said is it gets boring watching Zone. Zone's a pretty interesting sport, but 20 years on, we're still bad. And we talked a little bit about this in the pre-conversation. We're still bad at producing a spectator-style sport or a spectator-worthy experience for it. And I think that's got to be the other part of how you make competitive laser tag move forward. There are options as to how you do that. some being very technological focused. Some I have a design that I've sketched up of a purpose-built maze. If I had my own building and a little bit of money, which, you know, if that happens, I'll build it. But, you know, how do we make it a spectator sport?
Well, we've just got the next podcast interview topic already sorted out, mate. Just in that last 20 seconds of dialogue. I too have had similar ideas and drawings. So yeah, let's book that one in for a future
Done.
Chat. Yeah, beautiful.
Done. Happy to have a conversation around that one, because I think it's a fascinating quandary that is both surprising and completely unsurprising that we haven't solved it yet.
Well, so I think something that I am curious to see at the Sweenats, which starts I think tonight or tomorrow morning, is they're going to run 6-minute elimination games, and partly it was for they've started shortening them, but they had a scheduling compression that they needed to make, but also they noticed as they started shortening them, the games became much more exciting. And there was a whole stage of the game, which is the sit around and don't lose too many lives stage of the game, that now no longer exists in the game.
It doesn't exist.
So it's just everybody running around tagging each other. So, which is essentially what people want to see, right? So, I made a 12-minute Nationals game. Do we have that stage in the game where everybody kind of tries not to relinquish their base too many times and just gets up field points in the middle? Yes, with that period of the game in the finals and stuff like that, you'll see, I don't know how many bases went down in most of the games of the grand final this year, maybe 3 to 6 or something like that. So,
I do wonder whether or not that's a amount of time in the game problem, or whether or not, controversial hot take here, whether or not the actual game format needs some tweaks. It's been very static for a long time. So are we at a point where maybe we actually need starting to see some incremental changes to how the game is. I have a massive guilty pleasure for a Team Elim games. I love them.
Yeah, much fun.
I think they are, and I've played semi-professional paintball as well at a competitive level, and run and built paintball tournaments as well here in Canberra. So, it's hard not to take some of the bit of cross-pollination between the two of them. But I love Team Elim games, and I think if we could nail that format, I think, and clearly other people are trying to do it, that would be a really interesting viewing sport. Because there's investment there, which is really interesting to see.
It's just so exciting when you've got players down to just a couple of lives left, and they're in a duel, and who's going to win, who's going to get knocked out. It's it's a great game. Good segue, mate. I want to ask you before we complete today about just your position on the World Championships, the European tournaments, the things happening outside of Zeltac and the Australian scene. Is there much interest in Canberra for that kind of stuff, or are they really just focused on nationals and the Australian style of play?
So I've got a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, the Worlds and the European Championships, all the ones outside of Australia, that's something that I clearly had dropped off my radar a lot more, even more than the Australian scene, because when I stepped away, obviously I'm still friends with a lot of the people from around the country, so I would see inevitably when nationals happened and all of that jazz. The Worlds and things, because I actually, I've been to a Worlds while it was here in Australia. I haven't actually travelled overseas for Zone for laser tag at all, so I don't have those connections that were there. Canberra is an interesting mix at the moment. We've got a handful of players that I'm sure would travel, and have travelled, in fact, a number of times in some cases, to internationally.
You guys sent a team to France, I'm pretty sure, for Worlds, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. And we obviously had the team head to Finland as well beforehand.
Yes.
So we've actually got it. We've got people who have travelled, and there are still a few of them that are playing. A lot of them have moved on and gone to the different pieces. But I have a bit of a distinct split in my my community. Well, I've got quite a few younger guys now, either in their late teens or early 20s, going through uni and things like that, who are newer to the sport, and I'm really, really excited to see them come up through it. But they're probably not at a point where they're really looking at worlds. At least they haven't, or like international competitions. At least they haven't expressed it in any real way. In some cases, but the old hands, I'm sure, would happily travel again, and they're lucky enough that they're in a city that, it pays well.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit more disposable income in Canberra. So the communities might actually be quite keen to do it as we grow. I just think I've got a bit of a split in ages between ours. I'd be keen to go. I'm down for a tax deductible trip to laser tag in France.
Yep.
Let's go.
So the desire to play is more of a let's go traveling with our friends more so than we love playing one shot a second and stuns. It's more so let's go traveling.
I think there's a bit of both. I had this argument with the community on Monday, because we have to do leagues on Monday. I love one shot a second. I think one shot a second is awesome. It goes to my style of play a lot more than the current format. I'm not a huge fan of stuns, but one shot a second. National should be one shot a second. Hot take number 2. I'm gonna get stoned for that.
Not by everybody. Some people will stone you. Some people won't stone you.
But I think there is definitely an interest in going to play elsewhere. I'm not sure how much of that is born out of we want to prove that we are better than other countries at laser tag. But I think that might just be a byproduct of the scene in Canberra having shrunk to a point where we don't have that sort of huge drive there. There is a handful of people that absolutely would love to go prove themselves, prove Australia, right? As the top players, but I just think it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Well, mate, I've got one more question to wrap things up tonight. I want to. What's a hot take on a player that we might see at Tassie that's like somebody to look out for from Canberra? Could be an existing player that is having a bit of a breakout, or it could be a new player that we haven't seen yet. Have you got one for us?
I think Finn. He played this year. I think he is a player to watch. He's young. He's actually a staff member of mine as well, which is really frustrating because he's going to go every time and he loves it.
You're going to lose him at Natch time every time.
I'll lose him at
That's
Nationals.
why you can't have all your staff as players, can you?
Oh, it's the worst, isn't it? I think he's the one to watch. I think this year the team he played on, to be frank, he played above that team effectively. Like as an individual player, his skill set is incredible. He's young, but put him on a team that can kind of bolster that. I think we could see an incredible player out of him. Time will tell how he settles from a team and maturity point of view. And we all know that there's the best brawlers and the best players in the game, but they may not work well with teams. Time will tell about that, but he's got a good head on his shoulders.
Cool.
I like him as a staff member, so that's my pick for a Canberra breakout player for next year.
All right. So if people want a hot take, you just want to watch. I'm going to ask this question every time I get somebody on, and then you can make your fantasy team out of that, essentially. There you go. Good strategy. This is how I get people watching our videos, mate. It's like little Easter eggs in there.
You'll see your views spike just before Nationals.
Yeah, and
just people go back and rewatch all of them.
And just the end part of the video where I ask the question. Funny. Anyway, mate, thanks so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure connecting with you and asking you all those great questions. I love how you think about the game. I love that you're involved back with our game, and I look forward to hopefully being able to have more conversations again soon in the near future.
Yeah, I'd be keen. Let's get me back on. There's a lot to unpack, I think. A lot for me to catch up on, and it's good. It's lovely being back. It's good to see familiar faces. And yeah, have me back on anytime.
Awesome. All right, mate. Well, farewell for now, and we'll talk again shortly.
Take it easy, guys. Bye, everyone.
See you, everybody.